What does it mean to live a life of heroism? That is the theme of the month at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. What are we willing to be in the name of peace, love and compassion and justice? What are we willing to own up to, and what are we able to claim? Tough questions. Together we can explore all these angles and be better because of it.
And I was struck this week, as I thought about this and this memory came back, I was struck this week with just how prevalent this belief actually is today among not just kids, but also all of us adults. For instance, in the Soul Matters group that I led this week, every member, this was one of the things that stuck out for many of us, and I see many of the members of the group in this room. What stuck out for many of us as we discussed things was how each in our own way we expressed finding it hard, extremely hard, to relate to the concept of heroism when it came to our own lives. Now that's not to say that we didn't feel that there were heroes out there. We had no problem, right, lifting up heroes like the firemen who died recently in the tragedy in Webster, New York, or the teachers, the brave and heroic teachers that put their lives on the line and actually even gave up their lives to save the kids that were involved in that shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. And I certainly also all this month have been thinking, I'm not sure if all of us have heard this, but thinking about that young teenage Pakistani girl who was recently shot, and almost it was an assassination attempt by the Taliban for her courageous, absolutely courageous and heroic public protests against their efforts to close down and prohibit little girls from going to school. And also with Martin Luther King Day coming up, everybody in the group certainly honored the many heroes who have sacrificed and continue to sacrifice their very lives, and in many cases, if not their lives, their reputations for the sake of greater justice for all. But we all, and this was the thing that I've been noodling on and wrestling with all week, we all noted how somehow all that was sort of out there, When it came to ourselves, though, and the circle of the people that we actually know and interact with every day in our immediate lives, we all felt that the concept of hero was just not one that was so easily applied. We all agreed that we had people in our lives that we admire, right? Yes, admiration, that concept absolutely made sense to us. And role models, that concept certainly seemed relevant to us as well. But heroes, that concept just didn't seem to easily fit into any of our personal spiritual lexicons. And so I've been wrestling with this. And in the midst of that, I've come across a quote by Mother Teresa that's been providing me some help. And it's the one that I want us to wrestle with today. You see, towards the end of her life, Mother Teresa was invited to a big celebration to honor her for her heroic work and all her remarkable work. And she was invited to give a speech. And in that speech, she said this. She said, "Do not think that what the world needs is just acts of extraordinary love. What the world needs most is love that has not grown tired. What the world needs most is simply love that has not grown tired." Again, as I've been wrestling with this to help me tease it out a bit and dig deeper into what it really means, I've asked a number of friends and church members to think about it and tell me stories and talk about where that quote took them. And a number of their stories stick out to me. For instance, one church member told me about talking with her extremely conservative Christian grandmother about a family in her grandmother's small town where the husband of that family had just been sent to jail for an act of theft that did not at all fit his character. He didn't have any past of any kind of thievery at all, but it was clear that it had been done out of desperation because their family had fallen on hard times. And my friend told me that her grandmother and and in the best sense, with the best intentions and within her own spirituality, her grandmother remarked, she said, someone needs to quickly help that family find Jesus, so at least the rest of the family is assured of a spot in eternity. To which my Unitarian friend replied, wonderfully from my point of view, oh, come on now, Mama. While Jesus for eternity won't hurt, what they really need is just someone to bring them casseroles for a year. So they know all through that year that they're still part of this community. Love that does not tire, indeed. Another friend told me a story she watched on 60 Minutes a little while ago, maybe even over a year ago, about a lifelong triathlete who had a son with cerebral palsy. There was no way, this story said, that this father was going to let his extensive training and his races involved in being a triathlon, no way he's going to let that extensive training and time and races take time and attention away from his son. And yet he also wanted to share his love for the physical with his son. And so the story went on to share how the father found a way to include his son in every one of his races and all his training for the past 5 years. He's fashioned a harness, the story said, harness to an inner tube on which his son sets as he does the swimming part of the race. He's also concocted a bike with this giant, safe, basket-like seat on the front in which his son rides during the biking competitions, and then during the running portion of the race, the father pushes his son in this souped-up stroller, so to speak. The story, my friend said, went on to say that the father admitted that his times have become a lot slower and he is a lot more exhausted. But I certainly think we could all say his love has not grown tired. I also talked with my own father about Mother Teresa's quote, and with him living in an Indiana town surrounded all by Amish, his mind immediately went to the heroism that happened after that terrible shooting a while back in Pennsylvania at an Amish school. My dad stressed that, while most of the attention in all the press at the time was how the Amish went over and reached out to the family of the shooter, offering them condolences and help and even money. What my father said has remained less reported is how the mother of the shooter continues to this day to visit and provide health care once a week to one of the young school children who was left paralyzed from the shooting, bathing her, brushing her hair, helping her with all the rehabilitation exercises, relieving just for a little bit the girl's family from the very involved care of a child who's been paralyzed. 6 years, every single week. Certainly, again, love that's not grown tired. And so, I think these stories, and I think we all can agree that these stories are a good place to start as we dig deeper into what heroism might mean for us personally. But on another level, as I've wrestled with them, they still are a little bit extraordinary. But at least I think the gift, I think, in them is that they shift the concept, at least for me, they shift the concept of heroism a little bit more in an accessible direction. You see, for me, they help us see that, heroism doesn't always have to be about saving, right? Saving people from the dangers of burning buildings and bad guys, but can also more simply, but just as importantly, be about saving people from the more common threat of emotional isolation. Not bad guys and burning buildings, but emotional isolation. The small town family, the son with cerebral palsy, the Amish family, the mother of the shooter, all could easily have been stuck in deadly isolation if it were not for a heroic love that had not grown tired. In other words, friends, I think there there's a different, right? A different kind of rescuing, longing to be heard in these stories. Not at all the kind of rescuing that emerges when one digs down deep and discovers some reservoir of bravery, but the kind of rescuing that emerges when one digs down and gets in touch, right, with your own pain and broken heart, and then because of that is driven, absolutely driven by compassion to reach out to and rescue the pain and broken hearts of others. All of which makes me think today of one of my favorite poets, Naomi Shihab Nye. One of her most moving poems is Kindness. I only recently discovered the story behind the poem. I've known the poem for years, but never really knew the story behind it until recently. You see, in 1978, she and her husband Michael were on their honeymoon to Colombia. They knew they were going to a very difficult and dangerous country filled with drug smugglers, but they were both optimists and not at all naive, so they felt that they would be able to negotiate their time there safely and with care. But they turned out to be wrong. You see, one day on a two-day bus ride, their bus was hijacked by a gang right in the middle of the night. And the gang, she says, the gang pulled everyone from the bus out and lined them up along the side of the road and took everything they had. Naomi and her husband had to give up everything, their passports, their plane tickets home, cameras, all their money. And the situation was made even worse and more terrifying when one of the Colombian Indians from the bus resisted and then boom, was shot dead. There was this feeling, Naomi said, in the air that any of them could be next. But fortunately, she said, the gang, after getting all they had come for, left, and after everyone had offered everything they had, they left and left the people to their own, and then out of fear, everyone quickly got back onto the bus, and the dead Indian was just left, she said, to the side of the road with that image seared into her mind. She explains then that the bus, they all then traveled to the nearest. They went off track now, and the bus went to the nearest tiny village, barely even big enough at all to call a village, basically in the middle of nowhere now. And from there, everyone scattered on their own to find their own safety. But being in a strange country and with no resources or connections, Naomi and her husband were left to themselves. And as they asked around a bit, they learned that miles away there was a larger town with more resources and possibly more help. But they knew also that the journey now was dangerous, so they made the difficult, unimaginably difficult decision of having Michael alone hitchhike to that larger town. And so now, in this moment, Naomi was left alone, sitting there, scared in what might be called the plaza of the tiny little village. And the only thing she said she could think to do was to turn to what had always comforted and anchored her all her life. She began to write. She had a little paper notebook and a pencil in her back pocket. It was one of the only things that had not been taken by the robbers. And that's when she wrote the first words of her poem. And she says, I love this, she says that the words didn't seem to come from her, but rather floated. She said, floated through the air of that tiny village and landed on the page. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things, she wrote. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. That was her first line. She says she then looked at that line, looked at it and read it over and over again until somehow, she says, the words calmed her enough for her to venture out and find a place to sleep and something to eat. And I love how she describes this moment. She says, the faith in kindness, that sudden faith in kindness overtook my sense of being stricken. The line of the poem was a lever I held onto as I found my way. And then within minutes, she says, she As she walked around, she ran into a family of street people, a family in the middle of the night of street people who were collecting Coke bottles to later turn in the next morning for a few pesos so they could buy some bread to eat in the morning. She says she suddenly and almost inexplicably felt trust in their common struggle for food, their common struggle, trust in their common struggle for food. And so she showed them that she had nothing. She opened up her purse and showed that nothing was there. She showed she had no bags, no wallet, nothing. And so she needed their help. And so for the rest of the night, they allowed her to join their group collecting bottles. And in the morning, they ate bread together. And with that kindness and that common connection over suffering and need, now in her bones and also quite literally in her belly, Naomi spent the rest of the day finishing her poem. That evening her husband returned and they went safely on their way. I want to read us all the poem this morning. Again, it's called Kindness. Kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking that the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out of the window for just ever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel, where the Indian in the white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see that this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then, it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. Again, can I have a blessed be? I think it's fair to say it's not just me, right, but all of us. But I certainly would say me that feels every time I read this poem, there's so much, so much about it that moves me. But what always strikes me most when I read it is how the poem itself leads to such an ordinary conclusion. Knowing the story behind the poem, you can see how many of the dramatic and extraordinary pieces of her story that Naomi leaves out. The details, right? The details about the way her own life and the life of her husband were imperiled are oblique at best, almost even left out of the poem. In a sense, she depersonalizes, right? She depersonalizes the deep and dramatic suffering and moves quickly, so quickly, to universalize suffering right from the beginning of this poem. And then moves us even more quickly into the ordinariness of our days, as if to stress that the real drama and import is to be found not when you're off on some honeymoon and experience some dangerous event, but the real drama and import in life is to be found in the normal days when we go out among the crowds to mail letters and purchase bread. In other words, the whole momentum, right? The whole momentum of the poem is not to dramatize or distinguish one kind of suffering over the other, but to level every kind of suffering. The point is not, right, to sensitize us to suffering of great size as much as it is to focus us on the task and maybe even the gift of using our deep sorrow to become sensitive to the prevalence of all sorrow. You must speak, she says. You must speak to your own sorrow until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. The size of the cloth. And here, friends, is where I think the hero, right? The hero part comes in for her, even though she doesn't use that word. Simply put, as I read this, I think she's trying to shake us and tell us that heroes see and treat the crowd differently. Real heroes see and treat the crowd differently. Knowing the depth and breadth and consistency of your own struggle and sorrow, you can't help, in some deep, spiritual, almost mystical way, you can't help but know, even when it's not easily seen through the hustling and bustling crowd of our ordinary days, that others too are carrying a depth and breadth and consistency of struggle and sorrow every minute of their days. This knowledge, this sacred awareness given to us by our own suffering, she writes, goes with us everywhere we go, like a shadow or a friend. Are you with me? Is this making sense? It's making sense. And I think it's so important that it does somehow click in our brains and our hearts because it is, right, an entirely different definition of hero than the one that we're all just so commonly used to. It's one rooted in the ability, not so much to be brave, but I think in the ability simply to not forget. Not so much in the ability to be brave, but heroism rooted in the ability to simply not forget. Again, simply put, ordinary heroes see the crowd differently. They do the hard work of not forgetting that everyone, more often than we know, and much more than we can see, is hurting and often barely, each in their own way, holding on, ready to tip over like those weeble wobbles, that our kids all have. And here's where I think we need to, as we come to the end, where we need to bring that quote by Mother Teresa back into the conversation, because for me, this idea of not forgetting, deepens and clarifies what it really means to talk about a love that has not grown tired. Because it would be easy, I think, to interpret that phrase as simply a call, for consistency and unflagging commitment. A love that does not grow tired, we could easily interpret that as a call for us to stay engaged with people, projects, and protests over the long haul. And I think that's part of it, but only part of it, and not necessarily, I'm thinking, the most important part of it. Because the truth is, right, the truth is getting in touch with our own sorrow and burdens can either open us, like it did for Naomi and that homeless and family that met her. The truth is our burdens and pain can open us like that, or our pain and burdens can close us. They can widen our eyes, or the truth is they can also make us go blind. I know, speaking for myself, I know how easy, right, it is for me to get wrapped up in the self-centeredness of my own daily dramas. And I know when that happens, I am almost certainly best described as tired. Because all my energy has become devoted to and swallowed up by that well-known spiritual disease known as poor me. Now you gotta help me, I'm not alone in this one, right? Poor me, swallowing up all your energy, leaving nothing left, leaving you exhausted. And when that happens to me, everyone around me becomes no more than a faceless crowd. A backdrop or a supporting cast in a drama that is just all about me. They become invisible at best, or at worst, needy people I just can't be burdened with, or even worse, they become a target for me to just take my stuff all my burdens out on. In our house, we as a family have started calling this emotional laziness. Emotional laziness. But for the sake of today's sermon, I think we all can agree to just call it unheroic. A favorite Christian writer of mine writes, in this busy, self-focused, breakneck speed culture of ours, rarely do we stop to think of the present moment as the intersections of biographies. I love that phrase. As the intersection of biographies. He goes on, if we thought about that too much, we might be overwhelmed by our responsibility to each other. But if we paused, he says, just for a second to remind ourselves that there is a more complex story of happiness and hurt, triumph and failure, exhilaration and depression behind every face we meet, would we be as likely to judge them unkindly or dismiss them and be on our way? Friends, the answer to this question, of course, is no. Right? No. What we want most, every single one of us, I know you, so I know this is true. What we want most when we are in touch with our best selves is to be heroes that do not tire and do not forget. Just ordinary. Ordinary people who work hard to remember that other ordinary people are not just faces in a crowd, but unseeable biographies in need of more kindness than we know. And so, dear ones, and I mean that. So, dear ones, in the weeks ahead, I really hope we do continue to wrestle with the important question of what does it mean to be brave. But right alongside that, let us also place the equally important question of where, how, and with whom have I grown tired? In the midst of answering that, may we all remember that there is indeed room and need for each of us ordinary folk to strap on our capes of heroic kindness and help each other fly. May it be so. Amen.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.